Tisha Bader. Welcome to our series Durban Revisited on JBS in partnership with B'nai B'rith International, discussing the United Nations Conference on Racism held in the South African city in 2001 that became a tipping point for anti-Semitism. And we're speaking to experts and to political leaders who are fighting against anti-Semitism today as we approach the 20th anniversary of Durban at the UN. Here now is CEO of B'nai B'rith International, Dan Mariaschin, and guest Alma Hernandez.
Thank you, Tisha. Representative Alma Hernandez has represented the Tucson area since her election in 2018 to Arizona's House of Representatives. Representative Hernandez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, for those who don't know your story, could you share what led you down the path to identify with Judaism and the Jewish people? And what are the challenges and perhaps the blessings of being both Mexican American and Jewish?
Yeah, of course. So, I've been involved in the community since I was very young. My mother's side of the family from Mexico, Mexican Jews, my grandfather on my mother's side, and growing up, we knew this. We knew that they went from being Cohens to Quiñoneses, and he converted to Catholicism to marry my grandmother. So we always knew growing up that we had this family history, right? So it was when I was in high school that I told my parents, we weren't brought up anyway. So I told my parents I identified more with Judaism than I did with anything else. And me being the very stubborn person that I am, I told them that I wanted to go to synagogue. I wanted to do the things that all my friends were doing. I was involved in politics since I was 14. So I was around many members of the Jewish community at a young age. So my parents, being the old school parents that they are, said, okay, if you're going to do this, then, you have to follow through. So I started doing classes. We joined a small synagogue here in town. I failed Hebrew several years in a row. Spanish is my first language, so it was very difficult, of course. Growing up, I was always confused. It was a mix between Spanish and English at home. And learning Hebrew was definitely not easy for me. But I finally ended up going through my entire process in 2015 when I was an undergrad. And it was very important to me to honor my mom's family and their legacy. So my mother's grandmother's name was Librada in Spanish, which means liberated. So I was really excited to be able to add that when I had my naming ceremony. And, I went through everything as if I was a baby. So I have been a part of the community for many years now, never have felt not a part of the community. I'm very blessed and honored to be able to be a member of the Jewish community, but also an advocate for the Jewish community. As I mentioned, I started my involvement in politics when I was 14. I was pretty young when I started. I was the youngest woman ever elected to the Arizona legislature. And I really have used, my platform and what I stand for and taken it with me to the legislature. I've been able to use my voice and the voice of many people in our community to fight for the issues that we care about, whether it's social justice issues, whether it's fighting on behalf of Israel and making sure that we're keeping people like me in certain circles where many times we're not welcomed. And, using both of my identities, which is being Hispanic here in Arizona and also being Jewish, has been very helpful because I'm able to bridge those communities together and bridge those gaps and have these difficult conversations with people who may not always agree with me, but also people who just don't understand enough about our communities. So for me, it's been an honor and privilege to be able to serve for the last 3 years. I just announced that I'm running for re-election, so I'm very excited about that. But for me, really, it's a matter of doing what's right and many times doing what's not popular, which I'm very vocal on social media. I'm sure if you follow me, you have seen. But over the years, nothing has changed for me. Who I am and what I do is really what has been a part of my life and what continues to be a part of my life.
Well, you mentioned that you got your start in politics as a teenager. What led you in that direction, and what role did Jewish values at that point have in your decision to run for office, and as you think about your legislative goals today?
Yeah. So I got involved when I was 14. My brother actually brought me along into politics. He was already involved, and he bribed me by telling me I was going to be fed if I volunteered. And that's really how it all started. I have an older brother. He's 3 years older. He's also in the legislature with me, and he's actually running for Congress right now. And then I have a sister who's on a school board. She is the youngest. I mean, I'm the youngest. She's the middle child, and my brother is the eldest. Actually, my brother is the only one in our family who has not gone through the official process of converting, but he's very much involved in the Jewish community. He got us involved at a young age because he wanted us to learn about what was going on in our communities and actually do something to change what was going on. When I was 14, almost 15, I was actually attacked by a police officer on my school campus. And that's really what led my activism when it comes to criminal justice reform and other issues. But I actually, it was a very difficult situation because I was 14, already interning at the time for someone running for attorney general here in Arizona. And I was brutally attacked by an officer on school campus. I was kicked out of high school. I was sent to juvie for something I didn't do. And about a year and a half later, I was able to prove my innocence. And really, it was, by the support of my amazing family and my parents who wanted to make sure that no child ever had to go through what I went through or ever have a family go and experience what we experienced as a family. So that's really what kept me motivated and kept me involved in politics at such a young age, because of a lived experience and what had happened to me as a minority in my community and someone who didn't grow up in privilege, someone who grew up in a humble family, and being able to fight against a system that was rigged against people like me. And now, I have been able to do many great things around what has happened to me and what I experienced as an individual. But now, and using my Jewish values, when I got elected, I was very upfront about the issues that I was going to work on. Healthcare accessibility, education, criminal justice reform. These are all issues that we in the Jewish community care about and have been advocating for years. And, dealing with anti-Semitism as I was running for office, I was targeted by David Duke when he found out I was running in 2018. That was not easy, being that my identity, I identify with several different backgrounds. That also was not helpful, because I learned really quickly that politics can be very nasty, and that many times people will use who you are and where you come from to be able to target you. So that was a difficult thing. And I've learned over the last 3 years of serving in office that it's okay. And sometimes we have to be the voice and be willing to be uncomfortable in certain situations to be able to advocate. So that's really what's led me and what continues to lead me in the path of fighting for our community, making sure that I'm fighting against anti-Semitism at all times. Tomorrow, I actually have a bill signing with the governor here in Arizona. I'm taking a few Holocaust survivors with me up to the Capitol, and we're signing a bill that we have been working on for 3 years to mandate Holocaust education in Arizona. Finally passed, and we are going to be doing an official bill signing tomorrow. So these are all things that kind of have led me into the person that I am now, but also into the type of politician that I am.
Well, let's talk about the bill signing. You really took a strong leadership role in efforts in Arizona to pass the law mandating Holocaust education for middle and high school students. I can't think of anything more important. How do you see the importance, more than 75 years after the Holocaust, of ensuring this element in young Americans' education?
It's extremely important. We really can't expect children and younger adults. There's been research that shows that within the Gen Z group, we have 2/3 that don't even know the Holocaust existed or don't even know anything about the Holocaust. Really, what drove me to do this was the increase of anti-Semitism that we're seeing around the country, the increase of hate crimes against the Jewish community. We cannot expect people to understand. And when we say never again, truly it means never again, but we can't expect people to know these things if we're not teaching them. And it's really important for us to be able to teach this if we really want to fight against anti-Semitism, fight against hate with all communities. So that's why I worked so hard for the last 3 years to make sure that this bill finally got done. Something that was really really important for me was having a teacher that I had in first and second grade, Miss Teresa Dolgoff. She's Hungarian. She's a Holocaust survivor. Her stories were the first stories that I heard as a young child. Her stories always stuck with me, and she was able to testify on behalf of my bill in person at the Capitol. That was something that was really important to me and my family, because this is someone who has known me since I was a child, and she was able to come to the Capitol and share her experiences and the stories that she shared with me when I was not teenager, a child. Now as an adult, being able to come with me to the Capitol and advocate so that other children in our communities could learn about the Holocaust as well. So I was very fortunate to have the support of Ms. Dolgoff and many other survivors in Arizona to be able to get this done. It definitely was not easy. I know many states have been working on this for some time now. It was not an easy thing, but we finally got it done, and I'm really proud of it.
Well, you're right about some of these frightening surveys. I think the Claims Conference had a survey recently that said a very high percentage of the Generation Zers and Millennials could not name one concentration camp. And that in that survey, I think 10% said that they thought that Jews had even contributed to their own demise in the Holocaust. So what advice can you offer to legislators in other states that have not adopted this legislation about crafting such legislation and moving it through the process to get it signed into law? And what pushback do you think they might expect?
So my first advice would be don't go in thinking that you're going to get it done the first try. If you are in a state where you have people that you can work with, this has to be a bipartisan effort. It cannot be partisan. That's something that people need to understand, is that when we're working on things such as Holocaust education, we can't just have one party pushing this. It really has to be an effort, and a bipartisan effort. I was very glad that this was done unanimously in Arizona. We had every single Democrat, every single Republican support this. That is super important when moving this type of legislation. Also, reaching out to the survivors in your state. You know, every state has survivors. There's usually associations and organizations that are already working with these survivors. It's important to have their voice at the table. We can't run bills on behalf of a community if we are not including the community. My bill took some time because we made sure we had everyone at the table. We had the survivors, we had the social justice groups that were from the Jewish community, we had rabbis, we had everyone involved in this bill process. This was not done with me alone. This was a community effort. And this is what people need to understand, is that we can't be good advocates if we're not including our community and we're not including the survivors who the bill is specifically about. So those are that's my top advice for those that are thinking of running the legislation, but also really seeing what works in the state. You know, we had support from the Department of Education to be able to do this. Our Department of Education was on board of being able to teach Holocaust in Arizona, but we need to find allies. We also need to reach out to people outside of the Jewish community. You know, we had support from other organizations that were not Jewish organizations who were supporting these efforts, because they understand how important it is for us to be able to teach the Holocaust so this never happens again. So my main advice for anyone thinking of running this type of legislation is work with the people on the ground in your communities and ensure that everyone is brought to the table, and this is not just done in a partisan way.
Well, there's a companion piece to this. We know that as part of the legislative process in Arizona, there was a troubling dust-up over the inclusion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA as it's known, working definition of anti-Semitism. The broad mainstream of the Jewish community and its friends believe that this definition is really a key framework for educating the public about what practically constitutes anti-Semitic ideas, rhetoric, and action. Can you tell us about this controversy on the IHRA definition in Arizona? And since it didn't make it into the final version of the bill, what plans are there to still make use of the IHRA definition in the future?
Yeah, of course. So I'll tell you, I ran the IHRA definition bill previously. So I ran both bills, Holocaust education, and we had named the other one it was our anti-Semitism bill and our Holocaust education bill. Since the beginning of this process, we had worked with stakeholders and we were very clear about keeping both separate. In order to be able to get Holocaust education done in Arizona, we had to keep the language separate. In other states in the South, in Republican-led states, they had not been able to pass legislation that included both of the languages together, which is the reason why when I ran the bills, I ran them separately. This was an ask by the Holocaust survivors because they knew that including the language of IRA, which I support and I believe in, and so do many other people in our community, but they felt that including this language would not create the full bipartisan support for Holocaust education. And that was actually the case. So we knew this going in, that if we ran the bills together, we would face fights on both sides of the aisle, and that is what we were trying to avoid when it came to Holocaust education. My priority had always been listening to what the survivors wanted, and that was to keep the issues separate, because they said we will do everything we can to pass Holocaust education, and we will do everything we can to pass an anti-Semitism bill as well. So as I had mentioned to stakeholders and people I was working with on the ground, we ran the bill separately for that main reason, and I'm happy to help as the same way that I did when I ran the bill originally the first time, to help in those efforts. But my main priority was really getting the mandatory Holocaust education bill done. The majority Republican Party had asked that we included other genocides in this bill as well, which is another reason why we couldn't just add the IRA definition. So we had to include other genocides to be able to get full bipartisan support, or I was told the bill would not move forward. And there was a lot of behind the scenes meetings that went on, many conversations for the last 3 years until it finally got done. So my main priority this year was, we're in a situation where we can finally get this bill through. We need to get it through this year because next year it will not happen. And we know this because election cycle is coming up. Elections are already starting again. And we know that people will want to get out of the legislature as soon as possible. And we won't have the time to do all the work and the groundwork that we've been doing over the years. So there was controversy around adding both bills together, but we originally always had them separate for that main reason. And I know a lot of people in the community didn't really understand why that was done, but after explaining and after hearing from the survivors on why we had to keep them separately, we've had groups like CUFI, Christians United for Israel, who had lobbied and helped us get Holocaust done, who have told our leadership on both sides, said, we will help you pass an anti-Semitism bill, including IRA, after we get Holocaust education done. So I had allies on every side, whether there were Democrats or Republicans, to advocate to get Holocaust done. And we will, after getting this done, we will continue to move forward and work on other legislation.
Well, Israel, for its part, is a remarkably diverse and dynamic democracy, but sometimes the way it's covered in news reports leads to a narrative that obscures this. Israel has a large community of immigrants who come from Latin America and are Spanish-speaking. How could Israel better connect, do you think, with the Hispanic community in the United States and across the hemisphere, perhaps beyond evangelical Christian circles, where Israel does enjoy substantial support? And here I would just add, I know you addressed a very important rally in Washington in the wake of the recent fighting in Gaza, and your remarks on that very hot day were very well received. So what can we do to take this relationship that we already have and to improve it?
Yeah, of course. So one of the main things that I've been telling people for years, and I used to work at the Jewish Federation here in Southern Arizona. I was a JCRC person here. I've had conversations with many people over the years about building relationships in communities that we are not always a part of, building relationships with communities outside of the Jewish community to ensure that we have allies everywhere. So it is very important for us to reach beyond the evangelical community, beyond certain communities that are already supportive of Israel. So over the years, whether it was in my role as president of the Pro-Israel Club at the university, which I was in undergrad, there are many great organizations that are currently doing this type of work. For example, Fuente Latina, who is an organization that works specifically on Israel-related issues in Spanish. This organization has done great work out of LA, and I'm a part of it. I'm now one of their fellows. We're constantly trying to ensure that we are providing information and accurate information in Spanish to our Spanish-speaking communities. In Arizona, of course, we're a minority majority here. So we have many Hispanics and Latinos in Arizona, California, different states that we could be talking to and we should be talking to, because we have so much more in common than people think. Whether it's family values, whether it's, all of these other issues that we work on, there's so much that we have in common. I also think it's important for us to reach across and invite people to our homes, invite people to do an interfaith Shabbat service. Those go such a long way. I think there's a misconception sometimes that people don't understand the Jewish community, don't understand the Hispanic community and cultures, and bringing them together because they've never made it really an effort to get to know each other. So I've always been a strong advocate of making sure that we're inviting people. There's nothing more important than inviting someone and breaking bread, having a conversation at a table with their families, having a conversation with faith leaders in the community. And that's really the only way we're going to be able to bring to light the issues that are important and make sure that we push back against the anti-Israel rhetoric that we're hearing. The media definitely is very one-sided, unfortunately, when it comes to Israel. The UN, very, very much one-sided when it comes to Israel. There are so many different issues that we are facing, not only in our country and abroad, that we should be having conversations around. And I think everything goes back to blaming Israel for every issue that we have. And that needs to stop. And the only way we're going to stop that is by having conversations with people, having, these relationships and building these relationships with people who are outside of our community.
And finally, you identify as a progressive and as pro-Israel. It's clear that there's a growing perception problem for Israel among many young progressives, doubtlessly enhanced by negative narratives perpetuated at the UN and elsewhere, including at the Durban Conference on Racism. What would you consider to be effective outreach to progressives by Friends of Israel? And how can we make sure that fighting anti-Semitism is also a priority of that particular coalition and that particular place on the political spectrum?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my speech, that very hot day in DC, I am pro-Israel because I'm a progressive. And I think that it's very important for people to know many of the issues that we're fighting for and advocating for. Israel has been at the forefront of a lot of these issues. I've been an advocate and been involved with AIPAC since I was in high school. I have never felt excluded from certain groups within the Jewish community because of my stance on Israel. Maybe I have disagreements with certain people, but that's okay. It's okay to have these disagreements. What I fear the most is when I have people from my side of the aisle, when I have fellow progressives tell me, I'm no longer going to be a part of this organization or group because I don't feel welcomed. That is the worst thing we can do. And I'm constantly telling people, the minute we leave, they are winning. The people that don't want us to be a part of these circles and involved in these conversations are winning the minute that we give up. We can't just simply leave our party or leave an organization because you feel that the loud minority who's being loud is the face of the party or the face of these issues. We can't allow that to stop us from doing the work. And there are many situations where I'm, expected to leave one of my identities at the door, and I refuse to do that. And I just want to remind students and anyone who's involved that you do not have to choose between being pro-Israel or being pro-Palestinian or being whatever issues they are. You should not have to choose. You can be, and that's why, I identify as progressive. I care about many progressive issues. I work on many progressive issues, but I will never allow anyone to tell me that I have to choose one or the other. And that's something that's really important in our community and something that within progressive circles, people need to understand. Issues like LGBTQ rights, women's rights, all of these issues, Israel has always been at the forefront. And we need to make sure that people in our communities know this, because many people do not know. They hear what's going on in the media. They see these social media folks who are, what are they?
Influencers.
They are the Influencers, yes, there you go. They see the social media influencers and they believe what they put in one tweet, right? So it's important for all of us that do have a platform and do have an opportunity to have these conversations to continue to push and say, we can be supportive of all these issues, and at the same time we can criticize certain policies that we feel are not right. But there is obviously a level of criticism and there's a level of just being blatantly anti-Semitic. And a lot of times, unfortunately, those cross. So my biggest thing is making sure that people within my circles know the minute we leave and the minute we give up, they are winning. And that's been one thing that I refuse to allow anyone to make me choose. You know, I know that there's a small minority who is very vocal and loud within my party, who many times gets all the media attention, but they don't represent the party, and they certainly don't represent the values of the Democratic Party. So I just like to remind people, you know, my supporters are on every spectrum of the political spectrum. I have people who are Republican, Libertarians, Green Party, and Democrats who support me. And the reason for that is because I don't care what side of the aisle you are on. I think that we all can have a common, you know, have at least decent conversations about issues and not hate each other just based on our party affiliation.
Representative Alma Hernandez, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you for taking the time. Yours is an inspiring story, and congratulations on the passage of the Holocaust education bill in the Arizona legislature. And thank you all for tuning in. Please stay tuned to our full Durban Revisited series on JBS. And for ways to get engaged, please visit jbstv.org, b'nai b'rith.org, or our social media channels. I'm Dan Mariaschin. Goodbye for now.